So before we officially get things started with Shining Time Station, I want to briefly go over two things. One, why exactly I want to talk about Shining Time Station in the middle of all this Thomas and Friends discussion, and two, how exactly we're going to be tackling this show. So the main reason I want to talk about Shining Time Station is mainly due to the fact that this actually plays a pretty significant part in Thomas and Friends history. This was one of the first instances where Thomas and Friends was shown in America. This is how most American audiences and children were first introduced to the franchise of Thomas the Tank Engine and its cast of characters. Not to mention the fact that the very first Thomas and Friends movie, Thomas and the Magic Railroad, is basically a feature-length crossover between these two shows, consisting of settings and characters that not only originated in Thomas the Tank Engine, but also Shining Time Station, even a couple returning cast members. So I feel like if we really want to understand what made Thomas and Friends so popular and so special, we have to talk about Shining Time Station. Plus, not to mention that I literally said that I would be tackling everything there is to watch of Thomas and Friends. And how we'll be handling this show in terms of recapping, analyzing, and reviewing is basically the exact same way we handle Thomas and Friends. Go through it as quick as possible so I can get this video up as quick as possible, and we'll basically be going by scene, just like a Thomas and Friends episode, and obviously skipping the Thomas and Friends segments in these episodes because I already talked about them. And one last mysterious third thing that I want to bring up about Shining Time Station before we officially get started is that I discovered this show very similar to how I discovered Thomas and Friends. There were just a bunch of mysterious VHS tapes lying around my house, and a couple of them were Shining Time Station tapes. And where with Thomas and Friends, I ended up watching that all the time, and I would get DVDs that I would find in stores, and occasionally I'd even catch the show on TV. I didn't get any of that with Shining Time Station. Mainly because, one, it didn't last as long as Thomas did, and there obviously weren't any reruns or new DVDs released for a child of the mid-2000s. So literally all I had to go off of were the VHS tapes that my family had. And where with Thomas and Friends, I watched those VHS tapes and those other DVDs over and over and over again to the point where the great majority of them just got abused over time. With Shining Time Station, I think I only watched them like a couple times, and there are very few things that I actually remember about the show, other than the fact that I watched it as a child and that it has similarities to Thomas and the Magic Railroad. But enough of that, let's actually dig into Shining Time Station with Season 1, Episode 1. We open with the show's theme song, which, fun fact, was actually written by Joe Raposo of Sesame Street fame, which makes sense why the song is so dang catchy.
To a shining time station, where dreams can come true, waiting there for you.
The episode proper opens us with Ringo Starr dressed up in a conductor uniform, sees some people walking by, and then he turns into nothingness. Okay? This is Stacy Jones. She runs the Shining Time Station, and she decided to bring her little nephew in to help, one, clean things up around the place, and two, to generally just show him around the station. She shows him the information booth, the ticket booth, and even the arcade, which has games, music, and even movies. The film they show is a very, very old school animation, which features the can-can, ballroom dancing, and oh, that's it. See, it's it because the dumb kid broke it. The kid, whose name is Matt, by the way, asks if any trains actually come to the station. Stacy says, well, some do, and she plans that eventually there will be tons and tons of trains of all different types of engines that will be stopping by to Shiny Time Station once she fixes things up. Then shows Matt the mural of different types of transportation up on the wall, and then she tells him to go ahead and play some music off the jukebox. And this is where we're introduced to one of the recurring segments on the show, the jukebox, which features a whole bunch of puppets at the band, and they play the music from the jukebox. These puppet segments are literally the only other thing I remember from the show, outside of Thomas, of course, and the character of Stacy, because I do remember the fact that she was, in fact, in Thomas and the Magic Railroad. So the puppets then play the song Working on the Railroad, because get it? It's a show about a train station. Can I just point something out as somebody who loves puppetry? Now, the grand majority of these puppets are marionettes, but take a look at this one guy who is a traditional hand puppet, Punch and Judy style, and he sticks out like a sore thumb when literally all of the other puppets are marionettes. And as technically a puppeteer, that just really bothers me and rubs me the wrong way, and I absolutely can't stand. So we cut to Max cleaning the walls, and then we see tiny Ringo Starr in a conductor uniform return out of nowhere. Alright, this is the character of Mr. Conductor. His role in the series is to basically be the narrator of the Thomas stories per the episodes, even actually being played by the narrator of Thomas and Friends, Ringo Starr. A tradition that would continue in the Thomas and Friends movie, Thomas and the Magic Railroad, where Alec Baldwin plays Mr. Conductor, who was the narrator of the show at the time, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Basically, Mr. Conductor tells Max about an engine that he knows called Thomas, and he then tells him the story of Thomas Gets Tricked, implying that not only Mr. Conductor is the actual narrator of the Thomas and Friends stories, but it also implies that he is indeed a character on the island of Sodor that we've just never seen before. Mr. Conductor has to leave in a hurry, and so he says goodbye to Max. He then goes ahead and tells Stacy about this mysterious little man who lives inside the walls, Stacy believing him, saying that there's wonderful, strange little things at Shining Time Station. We then get introduced to a railroad engineer who's looking to stay at the station in order to work on the railway there, and we also get introduced to his granddaughter. Max tries to tell the granddaughter about the little man in the walls, but she doesn't believe him at first, mainly because Mr. Conductor just doesn't show up. He then shows him the arcade and the fact that there's movies there. She even ends up fixing the whole machine, and the film that they show next is a music video, which is a very music video of music videos. Thomas and Friends, right?
Wow!
Stacy then shows the engineer his own workshop where he can put all of his tools and junk, seriously considering staying at Shining Time Station. Mr. Conductor shows up again, with Max asking where he's been. Mr. Conductor saying that since he is a conductor, he's all over the place in terms of his job. In fact, he just came from working on the railway with an engine named Edward. And so, Mr. Conductor tells Max the story of Edward helps out. Mr. Conductor then leaves, with Max asking him if Edward got a new coat of blue. We then see a vaudevillian, banjo-playing tap dancer ask for a ticket to Oklahoma. He dances and plays the banjo, and then he leaves. Okay! The episode ends with the engineer deciding that he wants to stay at Shining Time, saying that there's something to this little station. This episode, I'd say, was a pretty good introduction to the series. We got introduced to a lot of different recurring segments that would, I think, play out throughout the entire series. I don't know, it's been a long time since I've seen this show. And we got introduced to several recurring characters that no doubt will become lovable in their own way. And I also think this is so far a nice, fun, slow, but still enjoyable show for little children, much like Thomas the Tank Engine. So, a pretty good episode overall.